All right, am I live? Yes, I'm live. Okay. I'm experiencing some technical difficulties here. Wait,
I'm experiencing some technical difficulties
let me
here.
close this down here. All right. The problem is I started the stream from my phone, and I thought I would be able to. I was on the subway when I thought of the idea to do the stream, and thought of initiating it when I got home on my computer. So let's see if this works because I'm seeing it on my computer now. There's a slight delay. I'm not sure how comments work. Let's see this. Let me put a greetings here. Just give me a second. Okay. I'm Greg. I do tutoring mostly for elementary age school children, usually from pre-K up to 8th grade. And a lot of some of the other stuff I do involves the specialized high schools, among a bunch of other stuff. So I guess my two specialties in a way is the state testing and specialized high school testing. So I do the SHSAT, SHSAT, which is mainly what I want to focus on in this stream. The Hunter test, I do some New Jersey tests, and other specialized schools like that. So this is my first YouTube, so I'm a little nervous. Certainly, first like this, and trying to get my act together here. All right, so this is kind of a test. I enjoy tutoring kids and children, and let's see if we can get any questions going here. I popped this on earlier, so I'm not sure who knows about this. I've been tutoring for a few decades, but I don't really have an online presence, so to speak. So most of what I do is through word of mouth and things like that. So the SHSAT is the specialized high schools test for the New York City high schools, and that's going to be starting next Saturday and Sunday. There's actually one, two, three, four, five. There's at least 6 test dates. So why don't I go over that and see if anybody wanders in here. There's 2 test dates. There's actually more than 6. There's, I believe, two tests given on each date. So there's 6 dates and two test times. So you can either pick the morning or the afternoon of next Saturday the 20th, next Sunday the 21st. There's also some other dates. Now, if you didn't register yet, all bets are off. And by the way, you were supposed to register by, I think it was last Thursday, and by the 18th, your ticket should be ready. So if you log back on to myschools.nyc, you should be able to have that available. So what I wanted this stream to be was about just logistical things, not necessarily about specific questions that might be on the test. Although we could eventually cover that if enough people end up joining the stream. So there's some other test dates. If you're a 9th grade student or you have an IEP, you can also get the November dates, which is November 3rd and November 18th. Also, there's the makeup date, which I believe was the 18th as well. There's also a November 1st date of the test, which involves certain specific middle schools were granted access to take the test during November 1st itself in their classrooms. So there's a whole bunch of test dates. There's also a test date at the end of the summer for students who are currently not New York City residents. So a requirement of taking the test is to be a New York City student. So if you're not a New York City student, you cannot take the test, and you cannot go to a specialized New York City specialized high school, okay, until you become a resident. They'll more or less catch you if you make a mistake there. So I guess nobody's joined the stream. So let me think of some things I can mention to say. By now, you should have practiced a lot on the test. And there's a lot of resources to do practicing with. I'm a graduate of Brooklyn Tech, and so is my daughter. When I took the SHSAT, there was no test prep at all. And I swear the test was slightly different at the time. When I took it, seemed to me more closer to an IQ test, although it had some of the current kind of questions it has now as well. Now it seems to be more strictly based on the curriculum. At the time, it wasn't as directly based on the curriculum, and it was supposed to be dealing with people thinking outside the box, creative thinkers, people who like to tinker around with things, things like that. Now it's really mastery of the curriculum, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Although I do like the creativeness and the out of box thinking and stuff like that. So by now you should have taken a whole bunch of practice tests, and this is your last week, especially if you're taking it on the 20th or the 21st, and you should be winding down your activities. If you're taking it on November 18th, you still have a month. That's great. There's always materials to teach. There's always materials to find. There's always materials to look. There's resources beyond the SHSAT that can be used for preening your activities, and things like that. So this year continues on with the grammar section, the so-called grammar section, which is the revising and the editing, which is different than the passages. You're going to have to do grammatical questions based on multiple choice, where you have to pick the best version of a sentence. And this notion of best always ran through the SHSAT, even before the grammar section was added. So that can be very complex. Personally, I find that one of the most challenging sections, because even though it's supposed to follow the curriculum, I find that the New York City implementation of the curriculum actually doesn't really teach grammar to the children. Most of them don't really know what a noun is. They don't know what a verb is. They don't know what more involved. If you ask, is a sentence a subject and a predicate? People don't know that. The people being the students. Whereas older people like me, we were taught it. And it was taught at one time. Even spelling and stuff used to be taught, and it's not really taught anymore. There was this notion that a child should understand what they're reading and not just focus on, quote, petty things like spelling. The truth of the matter is you have to do both. You can't ignore one side or the other. So let me talk about this, because as I was trying to work the technical difficulties, in the students I'm tutoring over the years, again, I tutor a lot of kids in the New York State test, grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I also tutor a lot of kids in the SHSAT. And a bunch of common themes keeps running through. And it's true even up to the best student. And one thing that happens is this is a high stakes test. It's an anxiety producing test for a lot of people. And what you want to do is make sure that you're calm and collected, and really putting yourself into this so that you've rehearsed enough. Practice makes perfect, you've heard. So let me just run through a few things I just blopped down 5 minutes before I started this stream. I'm noticing a lot of my students are being sloppy. I keep doing this because my phone looks like it's ready to turn off each time. It's also on a contraption here that's slipping down. So just bear with me. So a lot of my students are being sloppy. For instance, they're not reading the directions. Read all directions all the time. The main directions in the beginning of the whole test, the main directions at the top of each section, and there's multiple sections now, because not only is there ELA and math, but math, for instance, is split into two parts, which is the grid-in section and the non-grid-in section with the multiple choices. Okay, that used to not exist in previous years. And same goes for the ELA part. There's not just an ELA part. There's the revising editing part and the passages part. And they have their own instructions each. And then there's what happens in the question itself. That's part of instructions as well. So I notice a lot of students are being sloppy reading the instructions, and getting themselves in trouble by obviously getting the wrong answer. The truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, a point is a point. There's kind of two perspectives to take us. One is to get as many points as you can, no matter how, and the other is also to do that and understand what you're doing and understand the subject matter. The other side of the coin is the truth of the matter is there are test taking skills. There's definitely test taking skills that you have, and there's ways to improve your score and work with the system. And learning how to work with the system is important. Okay, and one way to do that is to understand the system. So you have to read all the questions. You have to read all the instructions. You can't cop out. And what's happening is because it's a time test for most kids are going to have to complete this test in 3 hours. If there's 114 questions, you only get about a minute and a half per question. And the truth of the matter is you don't even get that because you have to read the passages. So there's even less time. So when you have about a minute a question, you can't spend 15 minutes on a question. You can't even spend 5 minutes on a question. You spend 5 minutes on a question, you've lost 4 other questions that you could have been answering. So there's always this competition between getting through the questions as fast as possible and some notion of being efficient doing that. But it competes with being accurate and precise. Because if you didn't read the question, it doesn't matter how fast you answer it, it's wrong. Okay? So you have to figure stuff out like that. Another problem, especially in the math thing, is I'm noticing even my brightest students, when they have like a 3-digit number times a 2-digit number, they're doing that multiplication wrong. This is something you were doing for years now, and you'll have mastery of the concepts, mastery of how to solve the problem, and you're making a total silly error by doing a double-digit multiplication incorrectly. So it's stuff like that, and the takers of the test writers have written the answers such that they know traditional ways that students are going to mess that up, and then they put those as the answers. So even when you double check, if you can get time to double check, that's a problem. Again, it's a 3-hour test. There's 114 questions. Even an expert, even if I take the test, I can't take the test in half an hour. You have to read the passages. You have to read the questions. You have to understand what they're saying. I can't even take the test in an hour. It would probably take me an hour and a half minimum. I haven't timed myself taking it from scratch in a while. Problem is, I know all the practice tests, and so I can't take a new one from scratch unless the next handbook comes out. So students making multiplication errors. They're even making addition and subtraction errors. Just common where you do a borrow or something, or a carry, whether you're doing just addition or subtraction respectively, and they're making that mistake. And again, it's common things. And something I'm suggesting strongly to students is you have to do it fast again, so you want to get it that way done. On the same note, you want to do it correctly. So for as many things as you want to do computing in your head, if you're going to do 4 minus 2, obviously that's 2. You don't need to write that down. But if you have some complex number that's involving a multiplication by pi or something like that, it's worth writing it down sometimes. Don't do it all in your head, especially if you're doing 4 or 5 multiplications with an addition and subtraction thrown in. You can keep track of it. You certainly can. But when it's a high stake thing like this, do you want to throw away those points? Do you really want to throw those points away by not getting it right? So at least on some of them, and you should get a feel for the ones where you should write it down. Write it down. There's no harm in that. Another thing I notice is some students are not reading passages. Now with the revision section, it's less important because on a lot of the cases you don't need to know the totality of the passage and the revision editing. Whereas in the reading comprehension part, you do. That said, the revision editing thing also has what sentence doesn't belong. In other words, what's not the main idea of the whole thing, or what's not the main idea of the paragraph that you're looking at. The same thing they may ask to have just got a message from YouTube. Okay, I think it says I'm live. The revising and the editing part, you still have to understand the semantics. See, grammar technically talks about the lexicon, which is the structure of the language. Where are punctuations? Where do nouns go? Where does a period go? All these things like that. But there's also the semantics of it. So I can say something like that the pink ant drove the elephant down the block. That's grammatically correct. Semantically, that's meaning is meaningless because ants aren't pink and they don't drive elephants down a block. They can't even drive. So semantically, that's nonsense. So when you're being asked what is the best or the most precise or the tone of something or the spirit of the thing or what sentence goes where, you kind of do have to understand what happened, especially in the poetry. The poetry can get tricky. Poetry is historically a part that many students don't like because it's not the way we normally talk and read and write. We're not used to it. A lot of people don't look at a lot of poetry, and we really should be. In any event, poetry is full of a lot of figurative language. Literal language means what it says is what it is. Figurative means there's a lot of symbolism and stuff in it. So when we have things where we need to interpret, it's bad enough interpreting the regular normal passage in the reading comprehension part. But if we have to interpret a poem in the reading comprehension or in the revising editing part, its magnitude is more complex. It's like the SHSAT altogether. The SHSAT is not like a test people normally see. So when you're getting into the poetry sections and so on, you need to do that. So, but the other side of the coin is that competes with things too. So you have to get efficient in reading because you don't necessarily have an opportunity to read things multiple times. Some of you used to doing this in the state test, where you underline 1,000 things and you annotate your right base. I know some students write a book alongside of the passages and say the grade 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 state tests. You don't really have the liberty to do that here. Now that said, you should certainly underline things in questions, and you should underline main things in passages, and also in the revising and editing thing. Make notes of it, but try to figure out, use codes. Codes are very handy kind of things to use. A question mark, an X, a circle, an underline. Make sure they all mean different things, and you can be coding them, especially when you go back and look. And one of the things with the revising and editing part is that as you read the passage, figure out where the errors are, because they are most likely going to be what some of the questions are. So if you see something that looks odd grammatically, or looks odd where it's phrased weirdly, even if it's valid grammatically, or it just doesn't make sense, like the passage is talking about the SHSAT, and all of a sudden it mentions the sky is blue. Well, that sentence doesn't belong there. So as you're reading the thing, figure out where some of those things are. And if you've gone through enough practice, some of that should be starting to leap out at you. So there's a whole bunch of issues like that. Let's see, what else did I write here? Pertaining to questions. Some students are not reading the questions in full, not in the ELA section, not in the math section. And then they're reading them too quickly, and they're just glossing over important words. Sometimes they put in the word best there, and sometimes they put the word best in boldface. But if they leave out the boldface, no matter what the word is, whether it's best or not, or even if they leave out the word best altogether, you still know that you're still looking for the best answer. You're not looking for just the correct answer. In a lot of cases, all the answers are correct. You're looking for the best one. And you're going to, sometimes all the answers are actually not fantastic answers. In a lot of cases, I'm looking at some of the sentences they're giving as alternatives and saying, I would rewrite it completely different. So they're giving something saying it may have an error or should be enhanced. And then they're giving 4 choices. Sometimes those 4 choices are not really the total best way to write those sentences. So what you're trying to look for is the one they give you in the box or in the black line in the sentence, which is the best way to fix that sentence or that phrase or whatever. And again, you're really looking for subtleties often, precision, things like that. And realize sometimes, I just said before, sometimes they put the word best in, and sometimes they put it in boldface. And sometimes they do that with other words too, like precise. So you have to figure out the spirit and tone of the question and the spirit and tone of the passage and make sure your answer is following through that. State tests in other states often ask students about the tone the tone, the spirit of the paragraph. So if you have somebody talking slang and all of a sudden they say something real formal English, that's out of character with the spirit of the passage. Similarly, if you have some really formal, scientific, dry passage and all of a sudden there's some funny slang thrown in the middle of it, that doesn't flow with the spirit of the thing. So in other states they would ask specifically about this. In New York State they don't. And furthermore, the SHSAT doesn't deal with tone at all. Not directly, but indirectly it does. So there's all these notions and things that you know that are there, but it's that. Um, and the last thing I have written down is units. A lot of kids are still messing up milliliters, centimeters. Uh, they're even confusing how many how many feet are in a yard, and they're forgetting to do stuff like when something's talking about miles per hour, and the answer has to be in inches. They're forgetting to do that conversion, and when they remember to do the conversion, it's not there. I do see some people popping on and on here, so if you have any questions, please ask. Um, Again, I'm Greg. I'm from GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. I tutor a lot of kids over the past few decades in a lot of elementary school subjects. Sometimes I teach high school stuff too, and the SAT as well. Um, but I mainly specialize in state tests, the New York and the New Jersey ones, as well as specialized high schools. There's various specialized high schools. In addition to the New York City 7 specialized high schools, there's other specialized high schools throughout New Jersey, and in other locations. In fact, there's additional other high schools in New York City that are not so-called specialized. Some have tests. For instance, Hunter College is one of them. So I also teach for that test. And there's other tests where there's other schools that require certain things. Like Townsend Harris is not a so-called specialized high school, but it is one of the best high schools in the country, no less just in New York City. So, and by the way, that's something to think about here as well, because getting into a SHSAT high school is wonderful. Again, I went to Brooklyn Tech. I loved it. My daughter went to Brooklyn Tech as well, and she loved it as well. It was perfect for me, and I was perfect for it. Same goes for my daughter. But if you're mismatched and you're trying to do this because your parents are forcing you to do it or something like that, it might be a mistake. And if you can't get into the cutoff score on your preferred school, it's not the end of the world. You're still going to get a chance in the normal NYC high school selection process, whether you get into a SHSAT or not. You have that choice. If you get into a SHSAT school, you can pick that or the other one. You still have that choice. Okay. At the end of the day, you get to decide which it is. By the way, you pick your specialized high school list on the day you take the test. You're actually going to write it down on your test papers. Okay? So if you've taken enough practice tests, you should have some idea of what school you're going to get into. For instance, the Stuyvesant cutoff is often over 600. Okay? So if you're reliably getting, say, 490 as your score, don't put down Stuyvesant as your first school. And on the same note, if you're getting like 650 score, your chances are good you will get in Stuyvesant any year. So if you really want to go to Stuyvesant, don't put it number 2. If you want to get into Stuyvesant, you better put it number 1. And that really goes for any school you want to. The way they do the seat selection process and fill the seats up is by the highest scorer and their choice list. So the higher you get, the better chance you get for any school you want. But if you need to rank it in the order that you want it, but it has to make sense based on your score, right? So again, if you're taking these tests and reliably getting what you think is about a 490, and you should be getting a 600, it makes no sense whatsoever to think that you're going to get into Stuyvesant, which traditionally has the cutoff score. This is not insulting. This is a practical consideration that you have to consider and do and think about. You're going to do the same thing with your non-SHSAT school list, and you're going to rank them to make sense. By the way, just for people who don't know, there's a lot of super duper high schools. I just said it 10 minutes ago, but there's a lot of great high schools in New York. Most of the SHSAT schools are science and math based, heavy on that. There's also other math and science schools that are not SHSAT based schools. And there's nothing wrong with that. In a lot of ways, you might be better off. Because, for instance, somebody who lives in the southeast part of Queens who wants to go to Stuyvesant, they have a long trip. They have a pretty long trip. Or somebody lives in Rockaway, they have a long trip. If you live in Manhattan already, that might be a good choice. On the same note, if you live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, then you're probably not going to pick the York College, the Queens York College SHSAT school. Because the travel time can get really, really ridiculous. So you have to add in practicalities like that. Some of the schools start earlier than others. If I recall, Stuyvesant, I think, starts really super early. I believe I heard people getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go there. So those are all considerations. My younger daughter went to high school. She didn't go to a SHSAT high school, but she went to Long Island City, and I'm near JFK, and it took her hours and hours to get home. It really, in the end, and as they did more construction on the E-train, it really didn't make sense to do. So we have these pragmatics and practicalities you have to consider. And what seems life changing and OMG moments, sometimes they're not. So you have to weigh all that together. And if you really do live in those locations, you want to go to the schools, you really need to keep committed. Remember, it's 4 years, and these schools are not picnics. It's a hard thing to pull off. Okay, going to a SHSAT school. So, all right, I'm going to end it here because I'm talking to myself for about half an hour. Not that I don't enjoy that, but I just got back from tutoring. I'm kind of tired from that. It becomes mentally exhausting, and I have to tutor, I think, 4 kids tomorrow. So I'm going to study, and I wish you guys the best. If anybody wants to contact me, I'm GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. That's GregsTutoringNYC at gmail.com. I find the whole SHSAT process a lot of fun. It's intellectually stimulating. I can see the excitement in some kids who really want to go to these schools. So I wish you all the best and have a lot of fun. So I need to figure out how to terminate this thing. I'm going to peace out, everybody.